Today I am telling you the success story of Henry Ford. On a warm summer day, July 30, 1863, in a modest farmhouse in Greenfield Township, Michigan, a boy named Henry Ford was born. The United States was in the midst of the Civil War, but life in rural Michigan moved at a slower, more peaceful pace. Henry was the first son of William Ford and Mary Littygott Ford, Irish immigrants who had worked hard to carve out a life in the American Midwest. The Ford family ran a farm, and like most boys in that era, Henry was expected to learn the skills of farming and help out as soon as he could walk. From the start, though, it was clear that Henry's heart was not in the soil. What captured his imagination more than anything was machines. At the age of 12, Henry's curiosity found an outlet. His father gave him a pocket watch, which the young boy promptly took apart and reassembled. Soon, neighbors began bringing Henry their broken watches, which he would repair with surprising skill. This was the first sign of the mechanical genius that would define his life. Henry was not fond of school. He later recalled, "I never could see the use of going to school when I could learn so much more at home in the workshop." His classroom was the barn, his textbooks were gears and cogs, and his teacher was trial and error. While his father hoped he would take over the family farm, Henry wanted something more. He wanted to understand machines, build them, and make them better. In 1876, tragedy struck when Henry's mother, Mary, died. Her death left a void in young Henry's heart. "I was in a way married to my mother," he once said. Without her nurturing presence, Henry felt even less connected to the life of a farmer. At the age of 16, he left home and walked to Detroit, seeking work and a future that better suited his interests. In Detroit, Henry became an apprentice at the James F. Flower & Bros machine shop, where he earned $2.50 a week. The workshop was filled with metal, steam, oil, and the constant noise of moving parts, a paradise for someone like Henry. He immersed himself in the world of steam engines, valves, pistons, and bearings, learning everything he could. From job to job, Henry built experience and reputation. He worked at Detroit Dry Dock Company, gaining advanced knowledge of steam engines, and at night, he took classes in bookkeeping and engineering. He saved money by working odd jobs and continued tinkering in his spare time. He wasn't satisfied just repairing machines, he wanted to create them. In 1888, Henry married Clara Bryant, a strong and supportive woman from Greenfield. Clara would stand by Henry throughout his long journey, even in the darkest times. The couple moved back to the countryside for a few years where Henry tried running a sawmill and supporting his family. But the pull of engines and mechanical work remained irresistible. In 1891, Ford took a job as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company in Detroit. He was promoted quickly to chief engineer, giving him both a good salary and time to pursue his own experiments. This was when Henry first heard of the gasoline engine, a new invention that fascinated him. Steam engines were bulky and required time to build pressure, but internal combustion engines were light and efficient. In his spare time, Henry began working on what he called a horseless carriage. At night, He tinkered in a small workshop behind his home, and in 1893, with Clara cranking the engine while Henry adjusted the spark, they got their first engine to sputter to life. It was a small, one-cylinder engine, but it was a start. In 1896, Henry completed his first full automobile, the quadricycle. It had 4 bicycle wheels, a simple body, and a tiller for steering. On June 4, 1896, Henry drove it down the streets of Detroit for the first time. The public was amazed. It was noisy, slow, and awkward, but it worked. That same year, he had the chance to meet his idol, Thomas Edison, at a conference. Nervously, Ford described his invention. Edison encouraged him, saying, "Young man, that's the thing. You have it. Keep at it." That one conversation gave Henry the boost of confidence he needed. Encouraged, Ford began building a better version of his car. But building cars was expensive, and he needed capital. He convinced a group of businessmen to fund his work, and in 1899, he helped form the Detroit Automobile Company. However, the company soon failed. Henry was fixated on perfecting his cars and was not prepared to transition to mass production. As a result, investors grew weary, leading to the company's downfall in 1901. But Ford didn't give up. In 1903, with backing from a group of investors including the Dodge brothers, Henry founded the Ford Motor Company. He was 40 years old when he launched his first vehicle, the Model A, which sold quite successfully. However, Henry aspired for more. His vision was to create a car that the average American could afford, one that was reliable and easy to maintain. In 1908, Henry Ford introduced a revolutionary vehicle that transformed the automotive industry, the Model T. This car was designed to be straightforward and durable, priced at just $850, significantly lower than any rivals at the time. It had a 4-cylinder engine, reached 40 miles per hour, and was easy to operate. More importantly, Ford kept improving the design and bringing down the cost. "I will build a motor car for the great multitude," Ford declared. "It will be so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one." The Model T made good on that promise. Demand exploded. By 1913, Ford was selling hundreds of thousands of cars a year. But the real revolution came with Ford's innovation in manufacturing. Inspired by the meatpacking industry's disassembly line, Ford introduced the moving assembly line in 1913 at his Highland Park plant. Cars were assembled as they moved along a conveyor, and each worker performed a specific, repetitive task. The results were staggering. Production time for a Model T dropped from 12 hours to just 93 minutes. The price of the car dropped from $850 in 1908 to $360 by 1916. Ford didn't just build a car, he created an industry, and transformed how manufacturing worked around the world. In 1914, Ford made another bold move. He introduced the $5 workday, doubling the wages of his workers. Critics called him insane, but Ford argued that well-paid workers were more productive, and could afford to buy the very cars they built. This marked the birth of the modern middle class. By 1914, Henry Ford was not just a carmaker, he was an icon. The success of the Model T and the $5 workday had made Ford a hero to workers and a pioneer in capitalism. His company was producing more than half of all the automobiles in the United States. But with success came scrutiny, challenges, and controversy. When World War I broke out in Europe in 1914, Ford was deeply troubled. He was a pacifist, believing that war was a waste of human life and effort. In 1915, he funded the Peace Ship Expedition, a group of activists and leaders who sailed to Europe in hopes of negotiating peace. Though the mission failed and drew ridicule from the press, it showed Ford's commitment to humanitarian causes. Still, the US eventually entered the war in 1917. Despite his personal beliefs, Ford Motor Company supplied military vehicles, including ambulances and tanks. Ford's son, Edsel Ford, helped manage these wartime operations. This period also marked one of the darkest aspects of Ford's legacy. In 1918, he bought the Dearborn Independent, a small newspaper, and began publishing a series of anti-Semitic articles, including the infamous series titled The International Jew. These writings blamed Jews for many global problems and were widely condemned. Though Ford didn't write the articles himself, he approved and financed them. The backlash was intense. Jewish leaders and civil rights groups protested. Eventually, after a libel lawsuit in 1927 and increasing public pressure, Ford issued a formal apology, though many questioned its sincerity. This episode remains a painful stain on his reputation. Power struggles and labor unrest. As Ford Motor Company grew, so did internal tensions. Henry remained obsessed with controlling every detail. He distrusted banks, avoided Wall Street, and resisted outsiders' influence. He even built his own power plants, steel mills, and rubber plantations, aiming for full control of the supply chain, what he called vertical integration. He also hired Harry Bennett, a former Navy boxer, to run the company's security and crush union activity. The Ford Service Department became infamous for using surveillance and physical intimidation against workers suspected of organizing. Though Ford had improved workers' wages, his control over their personal lives, including home visits, restrictions on drinking, and monitoring behavior, made many feel trapped. Eventually, labor unions would rise to challenge this autocratic approach. By the late 1920s, the world had changed, and so had the auto industry. Competitors like General Motors, GM, and Chrysler were producing sleeker, more stylish vehicles. The Model T. By the late 1920s, the world had changed, and so had the auto industry. Competitors like General Motors, GM, and Chrysler were producing sleeker, more stylish vehicles. The Model T. In 1927, after producing over 15 million units, Ford finally ended production of the Model T. It had revolutionized transportation, but it was time for a new chapter. That same year, Ford introduced the Model A, with a fresh design and improved features. The Model A was a success, selling millions of units in its first few years. Still, Ford's dominance had slipped. GM's strategy of offering yearly model updates, multiple brands, and credit purchases began to outpace Ford's rigid system. Henry's only son, Edsel Ford, had been groomed to take over the company. Edsel was cultured, diplomatic, and had a modern vision for Ford Motor Company. However, Henry constantly undermined him. Even after making Edsel Company president, Henry meddled in every decision. Edsel tried to introduce better designs, marketing strategies, and labor reforms, but Henry's resistance made his work nearly impossible. The stress eventually took a toll. In 1943, Edsel died at the age of 49, likely from a combination of health issues and overwork. Grief-stricken but stubborn, the 80-year-old Henry briefly returned as company president. However, by this time, his health and judgment had declined significantly. The company began to suffer operationally and financially. Despite his earlier pacifism, Ford Motor Company played a major role in World War II. Ford built the massive Willow Run plant, which produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes, an astonishing feat of industrial power. The plant became a symbol of the arsenal of democracy, supporting Allied forces. Thousands of women worked at Willow Run, part of the Rosie the Riveter generation, and Ford's workforce became more diverse, though labor tensions still remained high. In 1945, Henry's grandson, Henry Ford II, took over leadership of the company. The younger Ford quickly reorganized operations, modernized management, and saved the company from decline. Henry Ford, now in his 80s, retreated from public life. On April 7, 1947, Henry Ford died of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 83 in his home in Dearborn, Michigan. Tributes poured in from across the world. Though his legacy was complex, there was no denying that Henry Ford had transformed the world. The end. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe.